G'day everybody. Welcome to this webinar as part of the TAS Farm Innovation Hub project run by Pinion. This is the last of the series that we'll be doing for this project. And today we're going to be looking at soil moisture seasonal snapshot like we have in the rest of the seminars. So going around the dryland probes around the state. And also we'll be looking at that autumn break. Did it happen? But also have a look back at the irrigation season. Just want to touch base with and look at spuds as an example. Got some really good data come out of that. But also look at irrigating and trying to replicate the autumn break. We spoke about that last time, but we want to have a bit more of a look and a few really good examples of what we can do to try and prolong that pasture growth when the rainfall rain doesn't fall. So just in regards the disclaimer in regards to the moisture probe locations that we have around the state, dryland probes around the state, we locate them in a representative soil and pasture type of the region. So getting a bit of an understanding that's important to how it's relevant for you. They're a combination of the AgLogic farming forecast sites, so the AgLogic weather station networks and the NRM South run farming forecaster project, which is a great tool to use and recommend you go have a look. Whenever we put probes in, we always like to put them on the dry side of average, so it can be a bit of an early warning system for when things are starting to dry off, or when the probes are starting, plants are starting to use moisture, lowering the profile. And as always, just don't use it as gospel, use it as a reference for your farm, because it's always going to be different, and there's always going to be variability on your farm as well. Things that affect the readings: water holding capacity of the soil and the infiltration. So again, having an understanding of how your farm differs is important. Rainfall efficacy, so how efficient that water is in going into the profile. So for example, an easterly low can sit there and over a few days and you get good application and infiltration, whereas a summer storm might come along and you get no infiltration at all because it runs off with high application rate. Location, topography also obviously affects that. So how that affects where the plants are using the moisture and how that's and whereabouts in your farm, these are the things you need to consider. I'll just pull up. This is my go-to graph when I just want to explain. It's one of the first dryland probes that went in as part of the farming forecaster site for NRM South. It's on the farm space side in the Fingal Valley, and this is a snapshot I took today. So we've got 3.5 years worth of data. So we're into our 4th season, and the one thing that I've kind of taken from this, looking at this recently, is that over the 4 years of soil moisture that we've started to record, we haven't had what we call, in inverted commas, a normal winter in Tasmania. We can see normal winter and spring. So we look here in 2002, 2001, absolute cracking springs. We had rainfall that kept falling really nicely through to, and no one was really irrigating until that November, December period, when usually we'll be looking to just irrigate in September. So if we look at this year was probably more indicative of what we'd usually find when our spring rainfall starts to pull back and crop factors start to really kick in and use up that soil moisture. The year in 2023, very dry year. We're well aware of that. And this year, we were tracking fairly similarly until we came to September, and then we got some really nice spring rains, which filled things up, and then things went into a bit of a normal period. But even this dry period here impacted what was happening here in terms of pasture growth. So while this is just a bit of an indication to show you, a bit of an example to show you that the blue line there is this season, the yellow line is last season, and when we have a green and a grey line, that's 2022 and 2021. It's our maximum soil moisture and our minimum soil moisture. But looking at this just kind of shows there's no such thing as a normal season, I think. So if we start going around the state and have a look where we are, we've got to be fairly quick in terms of going around the state, because nothing's really changed from the last webinar, and I don't want to dwell too much on it, because essentially we're looking pretty dry around most of the state. So if you look at Montague in the northwest coast, we can see here that we're actually sitting a little bit drier than where we were in the last 2 seasons. And really, when it comes to where we're sitting, when we're in this low region, it's much of a muchness. The only thing that's really affecting it, as you can see here, is some timing of some autumn rainfall. So hopefully we get a bit of rain coming in the weather system that's coming through over the weekend, and that could very well push this current soil moisture up to where we were the same time last year. So it's that trend coming into the next couple of months to see how we're going to winter refill, which is this period here that we really want to keep an eye on. If you go a bit further south, Edith Creek, we're looking pretty similar, pretty much bang on. But again, this season was these December rainfalls that we got here that had a big difference in terms of last year. So if you look this year again, those autumn rains that we had a nice impact at Edith Creek, so that kind of kept the pasture flowing. And I'm going to use this as a bit of an example when I talk about how we assess what the autumn break did for us. If we go a bit further east to Yolla, we can see here we're fairly similar. Just again, that autumn rain that fell there was hopefully something that we can replicate in the next week. South Rayana, same situation. We're sitting a little bit drier. We've had a little bit of rainfall in the last week that came across, but this soil just dried out and we're starting to get some preferential flow. So in terms of any stored subsoil moisture, stored moisture within the root zone, I think we're probably missed that point, and any rainfall that we get now will probably start to look at part of our winter refill. If we go a bit further down to sassafras, again, this is one where, as last webinar a month ago, it was looking really similar, but a rainfall that happened last year that we haven't had this year has just kind of pushed things up. So it's these lines here, this flat lining, that gives us a bit of indication of if we do get that rain, whether it will actually have an impact on either prolonging pasture growth or kicking it back into gear. Getting it starting off again is probably a bit too late in the season, but we'll dive into that in a minute. On the northeast coast, if we go to Winnalea, very similar period, and again, those rainfall periods are just again, they all seems to level out. It's really what happens in this period that drives how we're going along here. And overall, last year we had, and for most of the state, we had a feed window here that led to the improved season plus early season growth in August. If we go across more to those sandier sites, we can see here we're very similar in terms of tracking a bit above last year, but I think that's got to do more with that earliest season. So pasture growth started to go into the reproductive phase around here. So I didn't utilise pasture soil moisture a bit down further in the profile. If we go on the coast on sandier sites, again, we're pretty similar to where we were the same time last year. If we go south in the Northern Midlands, so we go Parkham, Elizabethtown region, last time we were looking about the same, and again, fairly similar. And in some of these probes are starting to go into our third season's worth of data, so I'll be interested to see how that ticks along. As you come down to Hagley, Northern Midlands, again, fairly similar. You can't really extrapolate too much from that, apart from there was some autumn rains that we got last year that we haven't had this year. Interesting to see where the period where it's kind of dried out and how some of these rainfall events haven't really had much of an impact, because a lot of them were just summer thunderstorms that came through. So while they're quite isolated and patchy, the instantaneous application rate that the rain fell didn't really have time to infiltrate into the soil. So it's something I often say, what's your rainfall worth to you? So trying to understand, these, yes, it might have said that we had 15 to 20 millimetres rainfall, but did it actually go into the profile, and is it actually available to plant growth? In these situations, these two rainfalls here, not really. If we then go to Bishopsburn, we can see that there hasn't been much happening in terms of effective infiltration. Same thing with those summer rains for the area around Bishopsburn, and hopefully we can replicate some of these autumn rains we had last year. Just really, I look at this flat line and go, it's all it's going to be is the start of winter rainfall. It's not going to kick any autumn break into gear. If we then go to Elsdon, which is on the other side of Longford, you couldn't get much any more similar. everything kind of matches up. That 2022 was a fantastic spring in terms of when rainfall and how long that good spring rainfall lasted. And so all that did was kind of shift the feed window back a bit. Whereas this season we kind of shifted the feed window the other way purely because of this dry period here. So usually, so that 2022, very dry year, we never actually got to our winter refuel point. And technically we don't actually still know for our winter refuel point. We can assume that this is it, but if it is, we only got there in September, which usually we're getting there around that June-July period. So this dry period here meant we had pasture growth in August, which you never had before. So it's shifted that whole feed window back 2 months, whereas that late spring shifted the feed window forward back 2 months. So it's very important, especially looking at this graph here, is that using last season, and we have short memories, and we like to think back to the previous year, how things can change so much that have an impact on when our pasture is growing, and so when we're making decisions such as weaning and moving stock and lambing and all those kind of things. So having a look at this is a great highlight of how we can use this data to assess where we are, rather than using our memory and visual cues that may not be reliable. So if you go a bit further down the side of Midlands, down at just south of Campbelltown, on some sandier soil, so some windblown sands. Again, you can see where that 2022 season was occurring, and it's pretty similar to Ellison there. So that last season we never actually got to refill a full point. Late full point didn't stay there long, but we had pasture growth here that was utilising that water. But again, we're sitting a little bit drier, but it's only to do with those autumn rainfalls. And then if you go down to that Tunbridge Woodbury area, we can see here that we're coming fairly similar point as we were last year. So similar thing to take out of that. If we go to the East Coast and the Fingal Valley, some of our earliest probes went in through this part of the state. We're looking fairly similar where we are. The only change is that change of feed window, that December rainfall that really kicked things along for the East Coast, made a big difference for those guys. Otherwise, they were tracking fairly similarly to that previous year. Same as we go a bit further south to Kelvedon. Similar to where we were last year. That 2022 year was just fantastic in terms of that prolonged spring, and I think the East Coast did get a run better than most. If we come along then to the Fingal Valley through just on the other side of Fingal, we can see here that we're tracking fairly similarly same time last year, compared to the two previous seasons, which were, I guess, one out of the bag. And then Speyside back to the old faithful, the graph that we showed at the start, tracking very similar to the same time last year as well. If we go into the Derwent Valley, so on Dungrove, which is on a sandier soil type, last time we spoke, it was pretty much bang on the same time, and not much difference there as well. They had some large rainfall events, thunderstorms that came through, not much of an impact. Now, this sandy is the issue that you get when you have dry periods. So they had a great season compared to the previous year. They were probably the most affected within the state. But you can see here, when you look at the comparison of the two, the difference between that blue line and the yellow line kind of indicates what our feed we'd use. It indicates where our feed became vulnerable compared to the previous year. But once it has dried off, and so usually that feed window shifted across that way a bit. But once we have dried off on those sandy sites, they tend to go hydrophobic. So any rainfall that we do get, it really needs to be that larger, that slower application rainfall. And then we go down to Weatheron, which is on some heavier soil type. Again, we've got that nice feed wedge in there. That's where it all happened this year for the guys down in the Bothwell region. And being a bit further on down in the slopes, they didn't get the same rainfall, and it's been sitting pretty flat. But hopefully they can get some rainfall this weekend, like the rest of us. To go into the Coal Valley, down around the Richmond area, we can see here very similar in terms of the last year and this year to the Drought Valley region, but sitting pretty similar, tracking fairly similar to where they were last year. So things are looking pretty dry around the state. Stockdale, which is one that's out of the bag because they were so dry, the subsoil was so dry that the roots just didn't have, there wasn't enough moisture in the soil for roots to actually push through into the soil and access that soil moisture. So there was a lot of moisture that was just not available, that was left because the plant couldn't access it. Whereas this year we had rainfall that wet that profile up nicely. We had low penetration resistance. It meant that our plant roots could go down and actually utilise the plant, that the soil was in the plant. So you look at this and go, well, last year was seen to be wetter than this year. Well, this one is a kind of a chicken and the egg story. So the only reason why it's dry this year in terms of stored subsoil moisture was because the plant had actually had that ability to access that moisture. If we go back up north to the islands and we look at Happy Valley, so this is just sitting under Mount Strzelecki. It's on the sandiest beach sands. We can see here we're tracking fairly similarly. Some rains in March, some welcome rains in March, just wet the top 10 centimetres. But we can see here already in January, this is a pasture which has got lucerne mixed into it. So that lucerne was drawing a lot of that moisture down to that 120 centimetres below the profile, but tracking fairly similar. And then if we go to Marucci, which is more central in the island, a heavier soil type, we can see that they had a couple of rains that didn't do too much there, but tracking fairly similarly. And they had another rain, but I'll come back to this in a minute to explain how we want to look at what our autumn break actually looks like. And if we go over to King, fairly similar story. Okay, things were tracking. I mean, pasture growth in August was one out of the bag in terms of the way it was pasture growth growing, mainly because King Island sits wet for that waterlogged state for quite a period of time, so they don't usually start to get sort of a pasture growth until that September-October period. But we had it in August, and we had a workshop over there at that time, and we're standing on a place and digging a hole where there wasn't moisture in the hole wasn't filling up with water. And technically, we probably shouldn't have been standing there, let alone digging a dry hole. But that meant that because we were in a waterlogged state, we had pasture growth here that we wouldn't have usually had. So while this yellow line was that 1 in 100 year drought, that tracked fairly similarly because all the moisture that this water here that would usually be part of our winter refill wouldn't be used by the plant because it's too waterlogged. The conditions aren't conducive to plant growth, to pasture growth. Everything that was being used was falling. So while this was usually winter refill or keeping things wet, it was actually servicing pasture growth. So these two lines, while they track similarly, you look at that and go, well, it's a similar story. It's completely different because of this period here, and understanding that and what that rainfall means to you and how that impacts is different. It is very important. And that December rainfall was fantastic in terms of prolonging that growth, not potentially the ryegrass. Ryegrass had, in many areas, had already gone into a reproductive phase, but for clovers, it was a big boost for that understory growth. As we go, so that was that there again, that gap between the blue and the yellow shows out where that extra feed wedge was. But we can see now we've hit that similar points where we were. So it'll be really interesting to see how we go in our rest of our autumn rainfall and how our winter rainfall goes. So ideally, and this is as we dive more into this data, I still haven't kind of got my head around that. I need to talk to a lot of people that are smarter than me and try and figure out where we need to go to actually get back to what, again, in inverted commas, is normal. Do we need, if we get to it's not so much have we hit our winter refill, when do we hit our winter refill, I think and how long are we sitting in that period for? I think it has a big impact. I still haven't got my head around what that's going to mean, but hopefully we can get some data that starts to show what that means. And do we need to go back into a corrective state to go back to what we usually see on a seasonal basis? If we go a bit further down to Pagara, so that other site was on the semi-coastal at Egg Lagoon. Now we go on Pagara, so Pagara alone. We can see here that, again, we never really hit that prolonged wet period. That moisture was being utilised. Similar curve and a nice rainfall there that had an impact. And as we go down, we're sitting fairly similarly The only difference is we're sitting a bit further up, but in terms of the pasture, just never really utilised all of that. Probably maybe because of the heavier soil type compared to that egg lagoon. And as we go to Linwood, which is a bit further southeast, we're on a heavier soil type and a restricted soil type, this one. So the other two sites, we could get down to that 120 centimetres for a probe. In this one, where there's Coffee Rock at 80 centimetres, we have a restricted soil type, but it's a heavier soil and a higher rainfall. So we can see here we had a lot more rainfall through that winter period. So it replicated a bit more of that typical winter, but still just all that active growth meant that we were tracking similarly to the previous year. And it's pretty similar in terms of where we were last year. But again, that feed wedge, what we had earlier, and cattle in a much better condition than where we were last year. So I want to just go over that's a bit of a rundown of the where we are at the moment. But I want to go and have a look at our autumn break and last time I spoke about what is an autumn break, what does it look like? The terms are 25 mils of rainfall received over less than 3 days, or rainfall of 30 mils or more received over a period of less than 7 days. When I look at this data, I really want people to try and look through the numbers like a 25 mils over 3 days or 30 mils over 30 days, 7 days, because you can miss what's actually happening and it can send you down the wrong path. If we can use the data that's available to us, we can start to gain a greater understanding about what these numbers are actually mean in reference to our location and what it's actually worth to us. So while those numbers might be a rough guide, and believe me, I like rules of thumbs. Rule of thumbs are a great place to start, especially something as complex as looking at soil moisture and how we can simplify it. But really getting an understanding of it means you can start to understand the timing of that rain and is it important to you, and what that weather's and the following weather's going to mean for it. So I always say something that I really want us to get a head around is trying to understand what that rainfall is worth to you. So, for example, if you have in an irrigation capacity, if you have drawn up the top 30 centimetres of soil in a clay loam, that means you've got potentially 25 to 30 mils of stored moisture available to you. So if you've got a 25 mil rainfall event, that pretty much takes you back up to field capacity. So it doesn't matter whether you have a 25 mil rainfall event, a 75 mil rainfall event, 125 mils rainfall events, you look at that number and go, wow, I've got more, that was more rain. You may have more rain, but it has no impact in terms of how much moisture is available to your plant. So understanding what that means to you is really important. So in an autumn break situation, understanding what that rainfall is worth is important, but it is also really important to understand that is in conjunction with the plant. Okay, so you might have rainfall, but has your plant gone to a state where it's actually not going to utilise that water, or is it still in a situation where it can use that water? Seeing changes such as your green tinge, yes, the paddock might look a bit nicer, your lawn might look a bit nicer, but is it a green drought situation? All right. If it happens too late, all you get is that green tinge, but it's actually not feed value to you. So understanding that. So this is one that I pulled up last time, and it was one that I really looked to as an example, because I know that there was people that bought cattle off the back of this. So it was a rainfall that happened in early April, and it was about a 5 mil rainfall event and another 70 on both. So we had about 70 mils. So people looked at that and said, great, I've got 2 inches of rainfall. Fantastic. I'm going to go cattle were cheap. I'm going to go buy them on the back of that 70 mils. But then having a back look at it, they saw actually that rainfall only gave me 3 weeks worth of pasture growth. Now, if you knew that was only going to give you 3 weeks worth of pasture growth, would you have done it? Now, we could see with previous data that where that rainfall filled the profile up to, if that water was available if it was utilised by the plant, we could see that all that happened was we had 3 weeks worth of pasture growth. In this case, if we waited a few days, we could see straight away that the pasture had shut up shop and it wasn't utilising this moisture. So this wasn't, while this is technically, yes, an autumn break because it fell more than 25 mils in 3 days before Australia Day, it was part of our winter refill. It wasn't part of our autumn break. So that's a really good example of that. Here's another one here down near Bothwell. Same thing. So over 25 mils on a single day, that constitutes your autumn break. But because we'd come out of such a dry period, we had there was pasture hadn't really come through that dry period very well, and what happened was we had exposed soil. The soil dried out. The soil was crusted, and infiltration had really decreased. So you have a look at that, and that inch of rainfall that fell did a little bit for that top 20 centimetres, but that was about it. And it didn't impact pasture growth at all. The pasture had long gone dormant and wasn't going to jump, wasn't going to jump back up because of that rainfall. So here's what I want to show you this. Trust me, I was trying to look at sites around the place this morning to give you examples of real-time information, but we just haven't had the rainfall to demonstrate that around the state. But I have picked two that give us a bit of example of what I'm trying to explain here in terms of what's happened this season. So we can see here at Edith Creek, we can see we've had this gradient here. We've got a consistent gradient. Yes, it's started to slow off, but what that's telling us is that the pasture is still utilizing moisture. We can see here, it's slowing down because it's starting to utilize at depth, less roots down there, so it's not drawing it as effectively, but we're still getting a gradient, which is important. The next thing we look at, we've got this rainfall event here, and that gradient kicked off again. Okay, so I'll look at that and go, yep, we've got an indication here from this rainfall that our pasture is still growing, that I'm confident that we can get, if we get more rain, that is going to constitute an autumn break because it's going to lead to pasture growth. And then the next one here, we've got that rainfall here in early April. And again, straight away, we start to go back into that gradient that is pasture growth. And if we look into the stacked graph a bit closer, the key thing that we want to look at is this diurnal stepping. So this is a graph where you got 10, 20, 30, 40, all the way down to metre 20. What we can see is that diurnal stepping. That's the key thing that we want to look at. That shows us that it is the plants that is drawing the moisture up, because it's drawing moisture up during the day and slowing down during the night. So here back in January, this was peak uptake. You can see that top 50 centimetres have been drawn up. Yes, it's slowing down here, mainly because we're just going to a period of lower evapotranspiration. Temperatures are lower, day lengths shorter. But as we can see here, we're getting that diurnal stepping here again. So that's telling me it's being used by the plant. So I look at that and go, yes, I would consider this an autumn break. But if we go then, here's an example on Flinders Island. Compare the pair, same period, but instead of a gradient, we've flatlined. So that here's when the pasture's been utilised. So the pasture's still going through it's drawing up moisture, but it's come to the period here, and I'd look at that in that February period and going, I'd be wary if we had rainfall to see if it actually has an impact. Because has our pasture just gone into dormancy? Has it just gone shut up shop and go, nah, I'm done? We have a bit of a rainfall here, gives us a bit of a clue. Now, this is the difference. There's a difference between soil moisture, the drop in soil moisture, and we need to know if it's plant-based or if it's water moving through the profile. Now, this is a heavier soil, and it is a soil that is prone to cracking. So that one there, that's a bit of a warning sign. So the first warning sign here, and then the warning sign there. Then the next one, which really drives it home, is this one here. Now you look at that and go, oh yeah, but that was a similar curve to what we're looking at in terms of the Edith Creek side. But the big key is here, okay? So it's that, see how this is the heaviest, and this is where knowing your soil is important. It's a soil that will crack. That Edith Creek site is more of a well-structured loamy clay. The way the water moves through that profile, it doesn't crack. The water moves as more uniformly from top down. This one here, this here's a sign already. I can see here that this soil moisture is dried right out. There's cracking that occurs in this soil. So when rainfall falls, it's prone to preferentially flow to this part of the profile. It's not wetting up our top part of the profile. Yes, we had a little bit of moisture uptake to the plant, but not much at all. But we can see here the main drawdown is this big, quick, rapid fall, and that's deep drainage and water just going to the cracks and then being dissipated within the soil. So I look at this and go, it's not being utilised by the plants. So while we've got the same weather patterns coming through, they are having completely different impacts in terms of your autumn break. So now in terms of, that's great, Marek, that's nice to know. You're making me sad. hopefully we can, not that I'll make things any better, but in terms of, thought we'll just jump on and have a look at how the rest of this autumn looks. So looking at that information, any rainfall that falls now, I don't think is not going to replicate an autumn break. It's not going to be an autumn break. I think it's going to be more part of our winter refill, mainly because because of that early pasture growth or early season growth that we had in August, our whole window shifted. So while in a normal year, maybe yes, we would have had that autumn growth, I think we've gone past it because our pastures were working a lot sooner in the season and finishing off a lot sooner. But if we look at rainfall in the next 3 months, from May to July, we're looking pretty much so where we were last time, sorry, we're looking pretty much 50% median chance of rainfall. So pretty much what our average rainfall is. And in terms of the next March to May, we're probably looking similar. And probably a little bit lower in the Bass Strait Islands. So it's pretty much looking at average rainfall going into the next 3 months. So yeah, keeping an eye on that and where we sit, and the next stage for me to look at this information. Okay, if we're projecting that out, if we've got that median rainfall, how does that look in terms of, can we simulate what that soil moisture is going to look like? But in terms of looking at the next week, now this is information that I've pulled off Jane's Weather. So we use Jane's Weather, and we've got a number of clients who then subscribe to Jane's Weather who can use this rainfall based on their weather station. So they've subscribed to an AgLogic weather station, and they can then use Jane's Weather as a weather forecasting tool that pulls in that and AI and uses AI learning to try and get that rainfall, weather forecast more predictive to your area. So in the next week, I know we've got a weather system coming through this weekend. So hopefully we get in this part of the state, we get rainfall within that 20 to 25 mils. Keeping an eye on that, yes, for pasture growth, but like I said, that's probably part of winter rainfill. So that's that weather system that's coming through for the rest of the week, and yeah, that 20 to 25 mils rainfall. So when we talk about everything we've spoken about now is in a rain-fed environment. Now I want to talk about, and we spoke about this last time, replicating the autumn break. So if we don't get that rainfall, can we irrigate, and can we kind of replicate that by continuing pasture growth? Now, last time I spoke about continuing or starting irrigation, it's too late. Don't bother starting. If we're on top of it, we can continue, yes, and there's strategies we want to know about that. If you want to do it effectively, you've got to know your soil, and you have to know where your moisture is. Particularly knowing where your moisture is important when you've, in regards to not established pastures, but for anything that you've sown in the last couple of months. Understanding what's happening with ETO as we're going into autumn and going into winter, understanding what that means for ETO. And when you're doing it, don't just go cold turkey. We can be a bit more strategic about how we go about it. So again, knowing your soil, we looked at this graph earlier, this one at weather on, if I get a rainfall, what's it worth to me? Knowing your soil here in an irrigated environment, can you actually replicate your winter, your autumn break? Yeah, you can. Here's one here, which, yep, they probably should have had some irrigation in there, but for whatever reason they didn't, and they started back up again to try and kick pasture growth. They can. Now, I could talk about this graph for another 5-10 minutes, but the point I want to raise, I've got a great example in a couple of slides' time. But this shows here that yes, you can. Okay, you can get infiltration. We can get our soil moisture back up to where we want it to be. In this situation, we can't. We're irrigating, but the soil's got to the point where it's cracked, it's dried out too much. We're getting preferential flow. We can see here our top 10 centimetres is not even really useful for us. Any moisture is going a bit further down. We're really starting to struggle. So knowing your soils and the variability of your place, do I pick my paddocks that I want to replicate an autumn refill on or autumn break on, or are there others that I know that I'm just wasting water? I'm not utilising the maximum the efficiency of my water application. So there's two examples of where one paddock which is and one paddock which isn't. So that's a really important part of it. So spoke about matching ETO. I've just cut this from Longford this morning in terms of where we're sitting. So 5.7, sorry, that should be 3.15. But if we look at 3.15, here's your average times 7, 22 mils. So we're looking, if we want to replicate what our plant needs. So it's with a crop factor of 1. We're then looking at a application of 22 mils a week, and that would be reducing. So making sure we're not putting on too much. So here's just a bit of example of how our ETO. So this is what a plant with a crop factor of 1. So let's just say it's a pasture, a 12 centimetre pasture. At the a week or so ago, we're looking at those high 3s. And as we're starting to go into May, we're looking at those low to mid 2s mils per day that it's using. So understanding that our ETO, our evapotranspiration, our plant water requirements, pasture water requirements are dropping off as the temperature decreases and our day length decreases, but also our pastures just start to wind down as well. So understanding your pasture is important. It's not just looking at these numbers. And I like chucking this one in here just to give us context in terms of how that fluctuates over a year. Okay, so in that winter period, how low it is compared to our peak summer periods. But then a lot of people are going, well, why would I irrigate when I know that winter's coming? Why would I irrigate when I'm just going to bank on winter refill? Well, if you don't need to continue pasture growth, that's all well and good. You can shut up shop and just wait for those winter refills. But if you need to match pasture production and you've got the capacity to irrigate and you have the water, there's ways we can go around it. Now, this graph shows a really simple way we can do it is while at the moment, so for this week, we want to match 22 mils of irrigation to match our ETO, to match our plant water requirements. What we can do is go, well, actually, what I want to do is pull that back a little bit. Let's just say maybe 15 mils. I'm going to put on 15 mils this week. Most of that there becomes available to my top 10 centimetres. So when we're irrigating a pasture, we want to be irrigating to the top 30 centimetres. So in this case, we're irrigating at the top 20. The plant's getting the majority of its water within that part of the root zone, but it's not quite enough to match everything that plant requires. So it's starting to draw moisture out further down at depth. So what we're doing here is we're creating a buffer. So when we get that winter rainfall, hopefully that winter rainfall, we've got somewhere to store it. So we're not going into winter with a full profile. So then so we just sit wet. So if we did get, say, hopefully in 2 weeks' time, we get 2-3 inches, the pasture hasn't shut up shop because it's waterlogged. We haven't gone from one state to extreme to another. We've kind of feathered our way into that. And here's an example that I just want to pull up that I literally was having a look at this morning. I thought, fantastic. This explains this beautifully what we want to see. So this is a dairy pasture, and it is using a hard hose irrigation. So we can see here that we've got an irrigator. And so this year, I've pulled data off the closest weather station on the property, and we can see here, this red here is rainfall, and these skyscrapers here, the green, that's irrigation. So they put an irrigation on here, perfect. And we can see here it's drawing that moisture up at that 30 centimetres, and it's hitting that point there. Then they put another irrigation on, it's filled up that profile there. And you can see here that difference there. See the difference in the diurnal stepping. We can already see that the plant is drawing up water not as quickly as it would in this 15 days compared to this 15 days, because temperatures decrease and our ETOs decrease and our day length has decreased. Yes, daylight savings was in the middle of that, but plants don't recognise daylight savings. Just if anyone does get confused and go, Marek, that yes, getting shorter, but daylight savings happens. Plants don't recognise daylight savings. But as we can see here, did the exact same spacing of that irrigation with a little bit of rainfall, and we've shot the mark up here. And the thing that we really want to look at is this here. Okay, so at this period here, it was perfect. It was perfect here in terms of we were irrigating the top 20-30 centimetres, and we had a buffer. But then we put on that irrigation, and it filled up that buffer that we would hopefully have replicated, filled up with winter rainfill. So what you look at that and goes, well, what you need to do, so you can see that ETO has decreased over the period. So we're looking here as the plant was taking nearly a millimetres, so over that 15 days, 15 mils less of water. So you can say, I can either put on less water or I can space it out. Now, in the case of a hard hose, I just say start spacing it out. So put on the same amount, but space it out based on this formula. So look at that and going, well, 1 day less, 1 mil less over 15 days. I need to, pull that out maybe another 5 days. So you hit that mark there. And what you're doing is you're just filling up that top 30 centimetres and leaving that for our winter refill. So I looked at this like this just highlights it perfectly what we want to try and do coming to that winter period, especially in a dairy situation where you want to really try and elongate your pasture growth throughout the season. So now I just want to talk about autumn sowing crops. So we're talking about trying to keep something going, but what about getting something up, something that's gone in? The same principles apply in terms of I don't want to get too wet, but I want to make sure that I get good establishment, and I want to make sure that my plants are going into winter healthy, because you might be wanting to pull back in terms of irrigation because you don't want to get it too wet. But if your plant hasn't established and it's not healthy, then it can't combat wet conditions as well as it could if it was a healthy plant with a good root system. So the things to consider is soil moisture status. What was in there before? Okay, so if you're coming out of, say, a cereal, you've drawn up a lot of that profile. If you've come out of a pasture, it's drawn up a lot of that moisture, that winter refill. And so you're going in empty. So if you're going in with a part after a crop that would draw up a lot of moisture, you've got to realize and understand that you're going in empty. So you might have to do some pre-irrigation, but make sure that you're irrigating to maintain that irrigation in the top, the soil moisture in the top 10 or 30 centimeters. So what was the irrigation schedule leading up to now? What was it before it went in? And also your infiltration efficiency. So this picture here is a really good way of losing infiltration and efficiency on your soil, especially if you're doing it, when we've had a late summer and autumn like we've had. It's been clear blue skies. It's been pretty warm. It's been, there's been some windy days. This is a perfect example where soil crusting can start to become an issue. So understanding, I'm putting on water, but is it actually going in is a real key, because when you're in a fallow period like this is when infiltration efficiency can just fall through the floor, okay? So yes, getting establishment is what we're aiming for, okay? You want to get them established and then just do enough to take them into winter, so then winter can do the work for you. So here's a graph here for an autumn sown crop where we probably a couple of little irrigations would have been ideal, mainly because I would look at this graph and go, I can see that we've gone into a paddock where the previous crop drew up a lot of the soil moisture, mainly because, we've got a little bit of the plants have kicked off, and we've got a little bit of moisture in through here. There was a bit of rainfall here that fell. That was nice, perfectly timed. That's exactly what we want to see. A couple more of these. It didn't go further than 20 centimetres. So it's not filling up our winter. It's not filling up our subsoil. A couple of these to replicate that is fantastic to increase our plant growth and to increase our plant vigour. But what happens is I can see here very quickly this moisture in that 30, 40 and 50 centimetres got drawn up very quickly. And so what our plants are doing are already having to draw moisture up at this 60, 70, 80 centimetre level. We don't want that to happen at the moment, okay? There's obviously not much available there because it's flatlining very quickly. Let's just help our plants along and just do a few irrigations to make sure that we're giving them as much opportunity as we can to build a good root structure. Plants don't go looking for water. That roots will grow when it can, where there's penetration resistance, and we want to have nice big root architecture. So a couple of irrigations here is not going to cause any harm. It's going to probably give you better vigor in terms of your plants. And here's another one in terms of what we're looking at in terms of making sure we're getting that irrigation efficiency. So this red here shows that these greens here, irrigation, we're not getting really good infiltration efficiency. And I'll refer back to this picture here. So similar scenario, but when we get rainfall, we do have irrigation efficiency. So that tells me that we've got a bit of a breakdown in soil structure. We need to make that work for us. So again, we're already drawing moisture down here at this 60 centimetres. A couple of irrigations will make all the difference there. So I think we've got 5 minutes left, but what I really wanted to touch on quickly, just looking back at our irrigation season, was an irrigation trial that was done on potatoes on the northwest coast. Some really cool data has come out of it. This is just preliminary, and I just wanted to show, I spoke about this at our workshop yesterday, but I just wanted to show for you guys, especially people in the room that have finished irrigating spuds. They're coming out everywhere at the moment. I really like this in terms of the season behaved itself in terms of an irrigation trial. In the years that I've done irrigation trials, it's been if I've decided to do one, there's a surefire way that you're just going to get heaps of rain. So most people say just keep doing them so we get rain, because the rain comes and you have no treatment effects. And the other thing that happened was we got a big rainfall event here in that early December that just pretty much set everything at the same point. So we've got 3 treatments here. Blue's optimal, red's is a medium irrigation, and yellow is a deficit irrigation. So on a red ferrocell. So you can see here with this rainfall, the first thing that shows that I see in this is that, and I'm aware that some spuds were really impacted with this rainfall based on planting date. So this is in terms of, planting date dependent, but this 130 mils had no impact on this crop that was sown timing wise here. So everything was wet, but and it didn't really affect it too much. The thing that really stands out here for me is that how soon, and I mentioned this point before earlier in the webinar, that this rainfall, in this situation, we had 25 mils of rainfall available, of 25 mils of water was utilised in this profile. So yes, we had 130 mils of rain, but only 25 of that was actually useful to us. Okay, from this period here, only 25 mils was useful. So this question is, after 130 mils of rainfall, when would we start irrigating again? And I asked if you've got people in the room yesterday. 10 days, a couple of weeks. I think 8 days was my shortest period. This showed here that we could happily start irrigating after 6 days, and that's 6 days was, and I would argue 5 days was optimal. Again, just because it was 130 mils, it didn't mean that it elongates the period of when we need to irrigate. All it meant was that was 105 mils of it was useless. 25 mils is actually useful in terms of getting us to this period here. The differential here. So how soon after this, again, not using your confirmation bias to let you drive when you need to do things, looking at the data empirically is really important to make sure that you're not starting too late. Because if you start too late, you dry your mold out, so you don't get the infiltration that you would have usually. So number one, we irrigate too late. It highlights we don't have to wait too long, as long as we do, to irrigate. So when we start irrigating here, the next one here, now this loss of data here in this optimal one was because the plants grew so well that they covered the solar panel and the batch went flat. So while it's a lack of data, it is actually a data point, an anomalous data point, but it's a data point nonetheless. But the other one we can see here is this different here. So I'm tracking fairly similar to this point here. And this deficit treatment got 1 less irrigation at this point. Now, I look at this and go, it's amazing how much of the effect that 1 irrigation here not going on had a difference. Here you can see this beautiful diurnal stepping, but it got to a point where the moisture started getting drawn out deeper in the profile and it started to flatline. We started to lose that diurnal stepping, and that, yes, we started irrigating again, but the damage had been done. So this period here, missing an irrigation in this peak period of the growth of the potato plant, had such a long-lasting impact for the rest of the season. So there are 2 things that stand out: how soon we irrigate after a rain that we might think's too much, and missing an irrigation, and how long that then, and getting those irrigations right, how long that prolongs that tuber tuber growth. And so it's not only is it important here, soil moisture is important here for tuber initiation, but also then for that tuber growth, and extends it out so we get larger, bulkier tubers. So if I was to look at this, I would say the blue line is if you want to just go all out and just get high impact, high yields. I look at this medium one and go, the yields are still pretty good comparative to the optimal irrigation treatment. But what this tells me, this is a lower risk. So I'm going, yes, I want to get high yields, but I'm worried about a large rainfall event coming in this period. So similar to what we're talking about, irrigating to an autumn break in pasture, I want to create a buffer. So here you have the capacity to create a buffer. So if you do get a big rainfall here, you can then got somewhere to store it. So this blue is a high risk irrigation strategy, and this is a lower risk irrigation strategy. Or you could look at this blue and go, well, this is an early season planting risk strategy because you're less likely to get impact from large rainfall events, and this is a late season irrigation capacity. So yes, it's preliminary data, but there's so much I reckon we can draw out of this, and I just really wanted to share this with you. And just a couple more graphs. This one here was looking at the moisture in the top 40 centimetres. So you can see here very similar. So majority of our water was utilising the top 40 centimetres, and this one here looks at water utilising the bottom 40 centimetres of the profile. So you can see here very similar here, but then that deficit irrigation was using a lot of moisture in that bottom profile early on, the bottom, which we didn't really want. We wanted to maintain most of our water use in the top 40 for this, peak period of the plant growth. But then you can see this is all right. I don't mind this at all. Uptake low in the profile to create that buffer is okay in a high risk rainfall scenario. So I look at this and go, I love rule of thumbs, and one of my favourite rule of thumbs that we work to is in irrigated pasture, which has come out of the guys up at Elliott Research Station, up the TAS Elliott Research Station, where they've if your pasture is drawing moisture below 30 centimetres in an irrigated environment, particularly in ryegrass, we're already starting to get a reduction in pasture growth. So I could look at this and go, well, if on a similar rule of thumb, if you're drawing moisture past 40 centimetres in a potato plant, we're starting to get a reduction in yield. Okay, so that's where we can start to build rules of thumbs, and then the next stage there is we can be growth stage dependent. So I've pulled the data, which is that optimum irrigation scheduling. And what I've done is it's a feature now that we can do, that I've been begging the guys at Wide Eye to do, is to add growth stages onto it. So what we can do here is our full, refill and stress line. So early on during tuber initiation, we want to keep mold moisture up, nice and moist to maintain that good tuber initiation. Once we've hit that period, we can start to then pull that back and do larger and more pronounced irrigations. So we can pull down our we don't want to sit too wet. All right, so we can pull down our full point, and we've got a greater buffer to irrigate. So as I said, we probably maybe a day too late when it came to irrigation, but if we just bounce in between there, and this is perfect. And then once we've gone to that tuber initiation, that tuber bulking phase, and we're pretty happy with where our soil moisture is at, we can start to draw back a little bit to create that buffer for that rainfall event. So again, we can start to create growth periods where our irrigation strategy changes, and we can then show that on the graphs. Now, this is version 1 of their graphing system when it comes to growth stages. The colours give me a headache looking at them for too long, but this is something that, very happy and keen to play around with to do that. And so then we can start to progress this out, and so give people an idea of when they need to start hitting these periods as well coming into the season. So the key takeaways essentially from today's webinar is, what's your rainfall worth to you? Really start to get your head around that. Don't just look at the numbers, look at the impact it's had, and look at what is relevant to soil moisture and plant factors to your part of the farm. And don't just look at one part of the farm, look at the different variability around your farm and how that changes. Use that to reference what you already know. As we're going into the rest of autumn, we're looking at a 50% chance of exceeding autumn and winter rainfall across most of the state for the next 3 months. So it's status quo there. You can strategically irrigate your pastures going into winter. It doesn't have to be one or the other. You can have your cake and eat it too. But again, making sure that you've got the data there to help drive that. And the next stage is how will our winter rainfall impact timing? I'm really interested to see not just if we get to full point in terms of stored subsoil moisture and stored moisture, but if we do get there, how long that's for, and when does that start our season growth? So we've already seen that how much of an impact that can have, and that's the next thing we'll be looking at. I just wanted to mention that a lot of that data is coming off that Farmer Forecast and also the AgLogic Weather Station network. So if you want to sign up, you can jump onto our website and have a look. Also, I wanted to mention our upcoming webinars. This is the last of the series, as I've mentioned, but it's something that I'd like to keep doing. So if it's something that you find valuable, please get in touch with us and let us know. But also your suggestions, anything that you'd like me to talk about, I'm more than happy to. As I keep saying with this kind of with these forms, is we're happy to talk. People are happy to talk about the things they know and the things they're comfortable with. We sit in our little echo chambers and do the things we do. But if it's not relevant or if it's not quite answering the questions and the problems that you're having, it's not really a solution. So more than happy, please send us feedback if the webinar is something you want us to keep continuing on, and anything else you want us to talk about. So there's also webinars, workshops coming up. We've finished the ones in Richmond, Longford and Burnie, but we've got Scottsdale coming up, our Soils 101 next week. And then a more data-driven irrigation scheduling, similar to the second half of this webinar. We'll be looking at that in 2 weeks' time at Scottsdale, and then the last ones will be on Swansea and the East Coast, and that will be quite viticulture focused, so perennial hort and viticulture focused. So the last thing I want to do was, if you want to whip out your iPhones and scan that little QR code, and like I said, feedbacks would be fantastic. Again, so we know that we're hitting the mark and what we need to do to improve what we're delivering to suit what you want. This is the last of the webinars, but you can go back and listen to our 3 previous webinars here on the TAS Farm Innovation Hub website. So the link's below. And this is a project that was run by Pinion, and they have a few other modules as there. You can see that screenshot below there. So jump on, have a bit of a look, and yeah, look, feel free to get in touch. Yeah, if you want to have a little bit more of the data in your area, any pointers in terms of what we're looking at in terms of going in, in the next couple of months, I'm always happy for you to get in touch with me. So, sorry I've gone over time, but hopefully you got a lot out of today. And yeah, thanks for logging me on. See ya.